Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are reviewing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, meant to serve as a fitting swan song for James Gunn in the MCU, as well as some of his core characters. This film has received mostly good reviews, and I think for the most part I definitely agree with them. There's some critics who've called it the best film since Endgame, and let's face it, that's not a particularly high bar to reach at the moment. But I do think it is a major step in the right direction and a film that I've enjoyed a lot more than recent MCU offerings. Ant-Man Quantumania was trash, Thor Love and Thunder and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness really did nothing for me, whereas Guardians has always thrived in being a very singular, oddball, quirky vibe that nothing else really can compete with. Yes, that means there's lots of kind of wacky humour which doesn't always stick, and that's the same with this film. But I think Guardians has always tackled that notion of surrogacy and surrogate families better than any group in the MCU. And James Gunn's writing has always kind of managed to balance a really underlying dark tragedy with his off-brand of humour. And I don't think that's better demonstrated than in this film. It goes to some very dark places. I think although we get, a lot of hints of the animal testing that goes on from the trailers, and you can kind of see where that plotline is going, it is a particularly affecting kind of backstory for Rocket, and I think it does lend an emotional charge to the film that the others have definitely lacked. And it gives us a very theatrical pantomime villain in the form of the High Evolutionary to beat. And I think he's played with the perfect kind of delusional grandeur to make him a real kind of menacing, unhinged threat to the Guardians. While the film has been heavily marketed around Rocket and his backstory, I think Rocket as a present-day Guardian is very much sidelined for the first two acts of this film. And because there's now so many Guardians, it often involves splitting up into smaller groups to achieve these little side quests. And so we don't often see all of the Guardians gelling together again, which I think it maybe could have done with a little more of. There are certain Guardians characters who I think have always been on the back burner. In terms of character development, I don't think they've been particularly well fleshed out. For instance, I don't think Drax or Groot have particularly had anything to do since the first Guardians in terms of being given some compelling emotional growth. I think Chris Pratt does a great job as Star-Lord and feels more like a leading man here, I think, than he has in previous outings. I've enjoyed seeing Nebula's growth as a character, and one thing that I was particularly pleasantly surprised by was Gamora and how she was utilised in this film. I'm never a big fan of these kind of multiversal ways to bring characters back and undermine deaths, but the way that James Gunn kind of incorporates her into the story quite maturely deals with that situation. I was glad with the direction that they took for the character, and I was really impressed by how Zoe Saldana kind of brought something different to this newer iteration of Gamora. Less effective was the humour surrounding it and kind of Chris Pratt's quite persistent moping about her not being his Gamora. I think some of that humour wore a little thin. I think the main outlier in this film was Adam Warlock. I think once he's introduced, the narrative has no idea what to do with him. When he does get drip fed throughout the narrative, it feels more like the narrative remembers it has to deal with him, so they kind of give him something to do. Which is strange because there was a moment in the film where I thought, yes, now he's got some character motivation, this is where it's going to go. But the film didn't do that, and definitely should have, to give his character a bit more relevance to the story and to himself. Because this is being pitched as the kind of Guardians' swan song in their current form, I was expecting some really heavy emotional sucker punches. I was always surprised by how choked up I got at Yondu's death in Guardians 2, and I know that James Gunn really is quite capable of pulling that rug of infantile humour out from under you to, lend a real emotional kind of hard-hitting moment to the film. But I do think this film pulls its punches emotionally and dramatically. I think it doesn't in terms of obviously the real tragedy of the story and the darkness that Rocket had to face. I think that was really well done. But in terms of like permanence and death and sacrifice, I thought there'd be a little bit more, I suppose. But I don't think the film is lesser for it. I really enjoyed the ending and where the characters kind of end up. Even if for a lot of them it kind of comes out of nowhere after 3 films, because they've had so little to do. So it almost feels like jarringly sudden for these characters to kind of have other ideas of what they want to do with their lives. I mean, to an extent, I feel like all their journeys are complete. For the most part, I really enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Would I say it's the best film since Endgame? I think it's a strong argument, for sure. It's not perfect, it is very long. It is very bloated, and often in overstuffed films when there's kind of side quests to go get this to enable them to do this so that they can go and do this, you often think, could we not have just cut one of those from the equation and saved 20 minutes of screen time? But hey ho, it's colourful, it's bombastic, the music choices are still on point, there's lots of that unique creativity to kind of witness and love, and I think fans of these particular characters will be satisfied with the send-off that they get. It's not a perfect film, but it does a great job at restoring some faith of mine in the MCU. So once you have seen it, guys, do drop a comment below, let me know what you think. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel, that's always a huge help for me. And in the meantime, we'll see you for the next vid.